Hey teachers! So I am someone who loves history, and it always makes me sad because social studies is just not given the same amount of emphasis or the same amount of time that math and ELA and science are given throughout the school year. At the last school I taught at, I was actually only given 25 minutes of the entire day to teach all of my social studies standards. So what I did to ensure that I was still getting in all that social studies for the school year was I used more historical fiction novels and nonfiction during my ELA time that were related to my social studies standards. And I get questions from teachers all the time who are interested in doing the same, but they just don't know which books to go for. So we're gonna head over to Barnes & Noble right now, and I'm going to show you the best historical fiction novels and a few nonfiction books as well that you can use when teaching history to your students. All right, we're about to head out the door, but before we go, I just want to let you know that this video is specifically going to focus on novels related to US history. Now I'm thinking about doing some more videos like this, so if you're interested in maybe learning about picture books or world history or another era in history using historical fiction and nonfiction books, let me know down in the comments what you would be interested in seeing more of. All right, let's go. I found several of my favorites, so let's sit down and go through them. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have all of my favorites in stock here today, so for any that I can't show you a physical copy of, we'll make sure to include images or pictures of the books from my house, so that way you can see everything. We'll also make sure to put the title of the book and the reading level on the screen, so that way you know if it's right for you. And also, just so you know, I have linked my affiliate link for all of these books down in the video description if you want to quickly order any for your classroom. So let's go ahead and dive into some of my favorites. These are going to be in chronological order of the events in the book and when they're taking place. So first up, we've got Jamestown history. As a Virginia teacher, Jamestown history is a big part of our curriculum. And my favorite book to use when teaching Jamestown history is A Lion to Guard Us. This book is about a group of kids who travel from England over to Jamestown on a ship. Their father is already at Jamestown. He is one of the first settlers there, and this book is fantastic at showing what life was like on the ship for those settlers traveling to the New World, and also what they found when they arrived as far as sickness and disease and what happened to many of the settlers when they arrived at Jamestown. Cannot recommend this book enough if you're a Virginia Studies teacher or just a teacher who teaches Jamestown. Now, one of my favorite books when it comes to the Revolutionary War is George Washington's Socks. And this book is awesome. It's about a group of kids who accidentally time travel back in time, and they get to experience a day in the life of the Continental Army. So they get to experience many of the hardships that the Continental Army faced, including freezing temperatures, starvation, even death, just being outnumbered by the British. They encountered Hessians and even George Washington himself. I am also linking my George Washington Socks novel unit down in the description for this video if you're looking for resources to use with this book. It includes vocabulary and comprehension questions for every chapter. It also includes graphic organizers, assessments, research activities, writing activities, and all kinds of other worksheets and activities that you can use when reading George Washington Socks with your class. Another great Revolutionary War book is called woods runner, and this one has been especially popular with boys because there's a lot of action. The main character, Samuel, he lives away from where the war is taking place, like out in the country. But after British soldiers come and they kidnap his parents, they take their farm, he joins the Patriots and even invades enemy territory to get his parents back. So you can see there's a lot of action, very dramatic storyline. This is a great one if your boys don't like reading to get them involved. Now I've got one more Revolutionary War book for you, and this one is great because it provides an entirely different perspective on this era in American history, and that is chains. In this book, the main character is enslaved in New York, and she must make a very difficult decision. In this book, the main character is enslaved in New York, and she is fighting for a very different type of freedom compared to the Patriots and Continental Army. She must decide whether to spy on her enslavers and possibly gain her freedom when the war ends if the Patriots win. But of course this decision is risky because if the Patriots do not win the war, it could create even more problems and make her life more difficult. So it's a very difficult decision to make. And the great thing about this book is that if your students enjoy this one, it is a trilogy. So there are then additional books that your students can read. I always like it when I can find a series of books because if my students like something, I have something else that I can recommend to them. Now the next book on my list is actually one that I remember reading when I was a 5th grade student, and I find that it's still very popular with kids today. This book is not a Newbery winner for nothing, and it is Sarah Plain and Tall. In this book, Sarah responds to an advertisement looking for a wife and mother, and she moves out west, and this book is just about her experiences and the perspective of the children that she becomes the mother of. Now this book is great because it really showcases what life was like in the 1800s in the Midwest. Alright, so the next book on my list is also a Newbery winner. This one has also been around for quite a while, and it is Out of the Dust. Now Out of the Dust takes place in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, and it does a really good job of highlighting the hardships that Americans faced during both the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. This is also a great book for incorporating primary sources. We've got lots of pictures and articles today, firsthand accounts that show what the Dust Bowl was like and also what the Great Depression was like. So I highly recommend that you use lots of primary sources as you're going through this one here. Now the next book on my list provides a different perspective of the Great Depression. It's so important for our students to see different perspectives in history, and using historical fiction is a great way to do that. Now in Esperanza Rising, the main character is part of a wealthy Mexican family. The family is forced to flee their home and move to a Mexican farm labor camp after a tragedy strikes. Now this book does a great job of highlighting hardships during the Great Depression, life in a labor camp, and also what labor strikes look like. Alright, the next one on our list is another series of books, and this is one of my favorite historical fiction series, and this is the I Survived series. This is another great series if you want to get boys interested in reading. I find that boys really like these books. Now there's lots of different books in the series that you can choose from. My personal favorite is this one here, I Survived the Bombing of Pearl Harbor. It really does a good job of showing what happened on the day when Pearl Harbor was attacked and what the effects of that day were. Now, if you are interested in reading this book with your class, make sure to check in the description. I actually have a novel study that goes with this that includes comprehension questions and vocabulary for each chapter. It also includes your assessments and a research project for when you finish the book. There's also some activities that you can incorporate with primary sources, but highly recommend that you check out the I Survived series. Alright, so the next book on my list actually takes place in Japan, but it is still relevant to American history because it's related to events that pertain to American history. And those events are the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan at the end of World War II. In this story, the main character becomes sick with leukemia, also known as atomic bomb disease. And there is a legend in her culture that says that if a person folds 1,000 paper cranes, the gods will make that person healthy again. And so she goes on a mission to fold her paper cranes. Now, this is another great book for showing different perspectives on historical events. A lot of times in U.S. history, we only hear about the dropping of the atomic bombs from the American perspective, so this provides another way of looking at those events. There's also a lot of fun ways that as you're reading this, you can also tie in passages, nonfiction passages about Japanese culture, and you can have your students try origami and paper folding in the classroom. Next up is another Newbery Award winner. In this book, an African-American family travels to Birmingham, Alabama in the summer of 1963, right around the same time that a very tragic event occurs. This book does a really good job of highlighting hate crimes and the civil rights movement in a way that is very age appropriate. And this is one that I find that students really enjoy, and they learn a lot about history out of this one. Now, the last historical fiction novel that I want to share with you before we get into nonfiction, losing my stack, is 910. And I actually just learned about this book very recently. I haven't had time to read the whole entire thing yet, but what I have read of it I think is great. Most of our students, if we're elementary teachers, our students were not alive when the September 11th attacks happened. So it's important for us to honor this day every September and teach them a little bit about what we experienced. This book seems, from what I read so far, to do that very well. I also like that it highlights the day from the perspective of different kids from different cultures, so you're getting very different perspectives on what happened that day. Okay, real quick before we wrap this video up, I just want to highlight some nonfiction. Now, nonfiction is a great thing that you can use for research projects or as a way to complement your historical fiction novels. Now, one of my favorite series for nonfiction is the Who Was series, and this series highlights all kinds of historical people, all the way from the presidents to Mr. Rogers to King Tut. You can find a Who Was book on just about anybody. And the last nonfiction book that I want to highlight is one that is very near and dear to my heart. If you watched our video that we released last week, I shared that I just released my second children's book, and this book is all about women's history. It's called Bold Women in History. It highlights 15 women who played a role in helping women to obtain more rights in this country, whether it's voting rights, working rights, different things like that. I'm super proud of this book. We worked really hard to highlight women who are often left out of American history, so I'm glad that we can finally shine a spotlight on them. Alright guys, so those are just a few of my favorite historical fiction and nonfiction novels. There's honestly so many good ones. I'm sure you've got ones that you really enjoy using with your students. Be sure to let me know what they are down in the comments. And then after you do that, make sure to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We create all of the content here on this channel for free. And by taking the time to like the video and subscribe to the channel, it enables us to keep creating free content for you and teachers around the globe. So until next time, happy teaching!